The iron bars cast shadows across the dirt floor like prison stripes, and inside that makeshift cage sat a child who had forgotten what kindness looked like. Lucy May was 8 years old, though she moved like something feral, something that had learned to survive on instinct alone. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles, her clothes were little more than rags, and her eyes held the wariness of a cornered animal. The travelling show had rolled into Millbrook on a Tuesday, bringing with it the usual collection of oddities and entertainments that frontier towns craved. But this attraction was different. This drew crowds not for wonder, but for horror, disguised as curiosity. "Step right up!" barked the showman, a greasy man in a threadbare coat. "See the wild girl of the Western Territories, raised by wolves, they say. Too savage for civilized society." The townspeople gathered, pointing and whispering. Children pressed their faces between the bars, daring each other to get closer. Adults shook their heads and muttered about the state of the world, but they kept paying their pennies to stare. Lucy May had learned not to look back. She'd learned not to cry when they poked sticks through the bars, or threw scraps of food like she was some kind of beast. She'd learned to make herself small in the corner when the crowds grew loud and mean. Most of all, she'd learned that no one was coming to help her. But she was wrong about that last part. Dr. Samuel Whitmore had come to town to treat an outbreak of scarlet fever, not to attend a travelling show. He was a man of medicine, educated back east, but drawn to the frontier by a calling to help where help was most needed. He was walking past the fairgrounds when he heard the commotion and decided to investigate. What he saw stopped him cold. The child in the cage wasn't wild at all. She was terrified, traumatized, and desperately malnourished. The way she flinched from sudden movements, the careful way she positioned herself away from the crowd, these weren't the behaviors of someone raised by animals. These were the responses of someone who had been hurt by people repeatedly and cruelly. "How much?" he asked the showman quietly. "She ain't for sale, Doc. She's my livelihood." Samuel pulled out his wallet, counted out more bills than the man had probably seen in months. "Everything has a price. What's yours?" The transaction was completed before the next show began. Samuel approached the cage slowly, hands visible, voice gentle. "Hello there. My name is Samuel. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Lucy May studied this stranger. He didn't smell like whiskey and tobacco like the others. His clothes were clean but not fancy. His eyes were kind, but she'd been fooled by kind eyes before. Still, when he opened the cage door and held out his hand, something deep inside her, some buried memory of what safety might feel like, made her reach out and take it. The ride to Dr. Whitmore's house was the first time Lucy May had been in a proper carriage. She sat rigid on the seat, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Samuel didn't try to make conversation. He simply drove steadily through the streets of Millbrook until they reached a modest 2-story house with a white picket fence and flowers blooming in the front yard. "This is home," he said simply. Inside, Samuel's wife Catherine was waiting. She was a schoolteacher, a woman with gentle hands and infinite patience, who had spent years coaxing learning out of reluctant students. But she'd never faced a challenge quite like this. Lucy May ate the first real meal she'd had in months. Warm bread, fresh milk, stew that actually contained vegetables and meat. She ate like someone who didn't know when the next meal would come, stuffing food in her mouth until Catherine gently showed her she could slow down, that there would be more. The first bath was a battle. Lucy May had never seen so much clean, warm water in one place. She was convinced it was some kind of trap. It took Catherine an hour of patient coaxing to get the child into the tub, and another hour to work the months of grime and neglect from her skin and hair. When they were finished, Lucy May looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The face looking back was thin but human, young but ancient in its wariness. Catherine had found some of her old dresses from when she was young, taken them in to fit Lucy May's small frame. "There," Catherine said softly. "Now you look like the little girl you really are." That night, Lucy May lay in a real bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow. The room had a window that looked out over Catherine's garden, where roses climbed a wooden trellis in the moonlight. It was more luxury than she had ever imagined, and it terrified her. Good things, in her experience, were always taken away. The next morning brought the first real test. Samuel had patients to see, and Catherine had to return to her teaching duties at the schoolhouse. They couldn't leave Lucy May alone. She wasn't ready for that kind of independence yet. So Catherine decided to bring her along. The one-room schoolhouse buzzed with whispers when they arrived. Every child in Millbrook had heard about the wild girl who'd been rescued from the traveling show. They stared at Lucy May with a mixture of curiosity and fear, unsure whether she might suddenly growl or bite. Catherine introduced her simply as Lucy May, a new student who would be joining their class. She set up a small desk in the back corner where Lucy May could observe without feeling trapped, and began the day's lessons. Lucy May had never seen letters before, had never held a piece of chalk or heard someone read aloud from a book. The sounds that came from Catherine's mouth when she read seemed like magic. Somehow, those strange marks on paper became stories about far-off places and brave heroes. During recess, the other children kept their distance. Lucy May sat by herself under a large oak tree, watching them play games she didn't understand. She didn't know how to ask to join in, didn't know if she was allowed. In the traveling show, wanting things had only led to punishment. But one little girl, perhaps 5 years old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, approached with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Why don't you talk?" she asked, settling down in the grass beside Lucy May. Lucy May opened her mouth, then closed it again. She could talk. The showman had made sure of that, if only to bark commands at her. But she'd learned that speaking often brought pain. "That's okay," the little girl said. "I talk enough for both of us. My name's Emma. Mrs. Whitmore says you're going to live with her and Dr. Whitmore now. That's nice. They're good people. Dr. Whitmore fixed my arm when I fell out of the hayloft last summer." Emma chattered on about her family, her pet chicken, her favorite games. She didn't seem to expect responses, content to fill the silence with her bright voice. When the school bell rang, she hopped up and brushed off her dress. "See you tomorrow, Lucy May," she called, skipping back toward the schoolhouse. That afternoon, Catherine found Lucy May sitting in the garden, staring at the roses with intense concentration. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Catherine said, settling onto the garden bench beside her. Lucy May nodded slowly. Then, in a voice like rusty hinges, she spoke her first words in the Whitmore household. How do they grow?" Catherine's heart nearly broke at the wonder in that small voice. "Well," she said carefully, "first, you plant them in good soil. Then you water them and give them sunlight. You have to be patient because growing takes time. And you have to protect them from things that might hurt them, harsh weather, insects, weeds that try to crowd them out." Lucy May absorbed this information with the seriousness of a scholar. Do they always grow, if you take care of them?" "Not always," Catherine admitted. "Sometimes, despite our best efforts, they don't take root. But more often than not, if you give them what they need and keep them safe, they bloom into something beautiful." That night at dinner, Lucy May asked her first question directly. "Why did you take me?" Samuel and Catherine exchanged glances. They'd been expecting this conversation, had prepared for it, but the simple directness of the question still caught them off guard. "Because everyone deserves to be safe," Samuel said finally. "Because children aren't meant to live in cages, no matter what anyone says about them." "Because," Catherine added gently, "we saw who you really were underneath all that fear, and we thought maybe, if we were patient enough and kind enough, you might want to stay and be part of our family." Lucy May considered this. In the traveling show, she'd been valuable only as long as she drew crowds. The showman had made it clear that if she ever stopped being profitable, she'd be abandoned on the roadside like unwanted cargo. "What if I'm too broken?" she whispered. "What if I can't learn to be normal?" Catherine reached across the table and took Lucy May's small hand in both of hers. "Sweet child, you're not broken. You're healing, and healing takes time. We're not going anywhere." The weeks that followed were a gradual awakening. Lucy May learned to hold a pencil, to write her name in careful letters. She learned that books could take you to places far beyond the confines of any cage, that stories could help you understand feelings you didn't have words for. She learned that Emma's friendship was genuine, not something that would be snatched away without warning. Emma taught her to play hopscotch and how to braid flowers into chains for their hair. She shared her lunch when Lucy May was still learning to trust that food would always be available. Most importantly, Lucy May learned that the Whitmores meant what they said. When she woke up screaming from nightmares about being back in the cage, Catherine would sit with her until the fears passed. When she flinched away from sudden movements, Samuel would slow down and announce his intentions before reaching for anything near her. The first time Lucy May laughed, really laughed with joy instead of hysteria, was 6 months after her rescue. Emma had been telling a story about her pet chicken learning to dance, complete with dramatic reenactments. The sound that bubbled up from Lucy May's chest was rusty and uncertain, but unmistakably genuine. Catherine, who was hanging laundry in the garden, stopped what she was doing and listened to that precious sound with tears in her eyes. The turning point came almost a year later, when a new family moved to Millbrook. They had a daughter Lucy May's age, a quiet girl named Sarah, who seemed as lost and uncertain as Lucy May had once been. Sarah's family had lost everything in a fire back east and come west to start over. The girl was grieving not just for her home, but for the beloved grandmother who had died in the blaze. Lucy May watched Sarah sit alone at lunch, saw the way she flinched when other children got too loud or moved too quickly. She recognized the signs of someone who had learned that the world could be cruel and unpredictable. Without being asked, Lucy May approached Sarah during recess. She sat down beside her under the oak tree, not saying anything at first. Then, in the gentle voice Catherine had taught her to use when something was frightened, she spoke. "It gets easier," Lucy May said. "Being scared all the time, it gets easier when people are kind to you for long enough that you start to believe they mean it." Sarah looked up with eyes full of unshed tears. "How do you know?" "Because I used to be scared too, all the time. But Mrs. Whitmore says healing takes patience like growing roses, and she's right." From that day forward, Lucy May and Sarah were inseparable. Lucy May taught her new friend the games Emma had taught her, shared her favorite books, and slowly helped Sarah understand that Millbrook could be a safe place to start over. Watching her daughter comfort another lost child, Catherine finally understood that Lucy May's healing was complete in the most important way. She had learned not just to receive love, but to give it. The traveling show never returned to Millbrook. Word had spread about what Dr. Whitmore had done, and decent folk made it clear that such entertainment wasn't welcome in their town. But even if it had returned, it wouldn't have mattered. Lucy May was no longer the frightened creature who had cowered in that cage. She was a child who laughed with her friends, who raised her hand eagerly in school when she knew the answer to a question, who helped Catherine tend the roses and listened to Samuel's stories about his medical training back east. She was a child who had learned that families weren't just made by blood, but by choice and commitment and daily acts of love. On her 10th birthday, the Whitmores made it official. The adoption papers were signed in the courthouse, with Emma and Sarah as witnesses. Lucy May chose to keep her first name, but took the Whitmore surname, becoming Lucy May Whitmore in the eyes of the law and in her own heart. That evening, as they celebrated with cake and presents, Lucy May stood in the garden among the roses that had grown tall and strong under Catherine's care. The traveling show seemed like a lifetime ago, a nightmare that belonged to someone else entirely. "You know what I think?" she said to Catherine, who was cutting fresh flowers for the dinner table. "What's that, sweetheart?" "I think sometimes people need to be replanted too, in better soil, with better care." Lucy May touched one of the rose blooms gently. I think that's what you and Papa did for me. Catherine's eyes filled with the kind of tears that come from overwhelming gratitude. And look how beautifully you've bloomed. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lucy May Whitmore stood in her garden, surrounded by the family who had chosen her, the friends who loved her, and the roses that had taught her the most important lesson of all. With patience, kindness, and the right conditions, anything broken can learn to grow again. Years later, when Lucy May became a teacher herself, she would tell her students about the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances, of recognizing that sometimes the most valuable things come disguised as something frightening or different. She would talk about the power of patient love to heal even the deepest wounds, and the way families can be formed not by accident of birth, but by deliberate acts of compassion. And in her own home, she would tend a garden full of roses, each one a reminder that beauty can bloom in the most unexpected places, as long as someone is willing to provide the right soil in which to grow. The wild child had become something even more precious, a woman who understood the true meaning of home, and who spent her life helping others find their way there too. In the end, the cage had been nothing more than a temporary prison. The real freedom had come from learning to trust, to love, and to believe that she deserved both safety and joy. Lucy May's story became legend in Millbrook, not as a cautionary tale about wildness that needed taming, but as proof that every child, no matter how lost or broken they might seem, carries within them the seeds of something magnificent, just waiting for the right person to help them bloom. The travelling show was forgotten within a generation, but the roses in the Whitmore garden grew stronger every year, and the love that had planted them spread through the community like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever there was someone ready to choose compassion over fear, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair. And that, perhaps, is the most important part of the story. Not that one child was saved, but that her saving became the beginning of countless other acts of rescue and redemption, rippling outward through time like circles on a pond, touching lives that would touch other lives in turn, until the original act of kindness had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Because that's what love does. It multiplies, it spreads, it creates more of itself wherever it goes. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to be part of that multiplication, part of that spreading, part of that endless creation of hope in a world that sometimes forgets how much it needs exactly that. The seasons turned, and with each passing year, the story of the wild child became woven deeper into the fabric of Millbrook's identity. Children who had never seen the travelling show heard the tale from their parents, learned about the importance of looking beyond appearances, of extending kindness to those who seemed different or frightening. Lucy May's classroom became a sanctuary for the overlooked and the struggling. When Timothy Morrison arrived in town, with a stutter so severe that other children mocked him mercilessly, it was Lucy May who spent extra hours helping him find his voice. When the Walsh family's youngest daughter showed up to school with bruises that told a story no child should have to live, it was Lucy May who noticed, who reported, who made sure the little girl found safety. "You have a gift," Catherine told her daughter one evening as they walked through the garden together. Both women were older now, silver threading through their hair, but the roses bloomed as vibrant as ever. "What kind of gift?" Lucy May asked, deadheading the spent blooms with practiced hands. "You see the caged children even when they're not behind actual bars," Catherine replied. "You recognize the ones who've learned to make themselves small, to expect cruelty instead of kindness, and you know how to reach them because you remember what it felt like to be them." Lucy May paused in her work, a spent rose bloom cradled in her palm. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you and Papa hadn't come that day, if no one had chosen to see past what I appeared to be. But someone did," Catherine said firmly, "and that's what matters." That's what you teach your students every day, that someone will choose to see them, to value them, to believe in their worth, even when they can't believe in it themselves. As the town grew and changed around them, the Whitmore house remained a constant. Samuel continued his medical practice well into his 70s, his gentle hands bringing healing to bodies, just as his compassionate heart had once brought healing to a broken child's spirit. Catherine taught 3 generations of Millbrook children, watching them grow up to become teachers and doctors and shopkeepers and farmers who carried forward the lessons of empathy she had modeled for them. And Lucy May. Lucy May became the living proof that love could indeed work miracles, that patience and kindness could transform even the most damaged soul into something beautiful and strong. Her own children, adopted from various circumstances of hardship and loss, grew up understanding that family was about choice and commitment, not biology. They learned that everyone deserves a chance to bloom, given the right soil and the right care. The old traveling show route was eventually replaced by railroad tracks that brought new opportunities and new challenges to Millbrook. But in the Whitmore garden, among the roses that had been planted with hope and tended with love, the most important lessons remained unchanged, that every person has inherent worth, that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most broken among us, when given the chance, can grow into the most beautiful flowers of all. On quiet evenings, when the sun painted the sky in watercolors and the roses released their sweetest fragrance into the cooling air, Lucy May would sit on the same bench where Catherine had once explained the mysteries of growing things. She would think about cages, both the iron ones that confined bodies and the invisible ones that trapped hearts and minds, and she would smile, knowing that every day brought new opportunities to help someone find their way to freedom. The wild child had indeed been tamed, but not in the way the showman had intended. She had been tamed by love, gentled by patience, and transformed by the revolutionary idea that she was worthy of both safety and joy. And in learning to accept these gifts, she had become someone who could offer them to others, creating an endless cycle of healing that would outlast any individual life, any single generation, any temporary hardship that might threaten to break the human spirit. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. Not that one child had been saved from a cage, but that her salvation had become a beacon, calling out across the years to other lost souls, promising them that somewhere in this wide world there were gardens waiting to welcome them home. The story might have ended there, a neat conclusion to a tale of rescue and redemption. But life, as Lucy May had learned, rarely follows the tidy patterns of storybooks. Real healing is messier, more complex, and far more beautiful than any simple narrative could capture. When Lucy May was 35, a letter arrived that would test everything she had learned about forgiveness and the power of second chances. The envelope bore the shaky handwriting of someone unaccustomed to holding a pen, and the return address was from a state penitentiary 300 miles away. Inside, written on cheap paper in those same uncertain letters, was a confession that shook her to her core. Miss Lucy May, you don't know me, but I know you. I was the one who sold you to that traveling show when you were just a little thing. I was drunk most days back then, and desperate for money to feed my own addiction. I told myself you were better off with them than with me, but I knew it wasn't true even then. I've been in prison for 5 years now, and I've had time to think about what I'd done. I know sorry ain't enough, but it's all I got. If you ever find it in your heart to forgive an old fool, I'd be grateful. If not, I understand that too. Your father, if I got any right to call myself that, Jake Morrison. The letter fell from Lucy May's trembling hands. All these years she had wondered about her origins, had created stories in her mind about parents who had loved her, but been forced by circumstances to give her up. The truth was harsher. She had been sold by a man who chose his addiction over his child's welfare. Samuel found her in the garden that evening, sitting among the roses with tears streaming down her face. Without a word, He sat beside her and waited for her to speak. "He's dying," she finally whispered. "The prison doctor says he has consumption. He might have months, maybe less." "What do you want to do?" Samuel asked gently. "I don't know," Lucy May admitted. "Part of me wants to hate him. Part of me wants to pretend I never got that letter. But another part—" She touched one of the rose blooms, its petals soft as silk beneath her fingers. "Another part remembers what you taught me about forgiveness being a gift we give ourselves, not the people who hurt us." The journey to the state penitentiary took 2 days by train. Lucy May made the trip alone, despite Catherine's offers to accompany her. This was something she needed to face on her own terms, in her own way. The man who shuffled into the visiting room bore little resemblance to any father she might have imagined. Jake Morrison was thin to the point of gauntness, his skin yellowed with sickness, his hands shaking from both illness and years of hard drinking. When he saw her, he stopped walking entirely, as if the sight of her had stolen his breath. "You came," he whispered, settling heavily into the chair across from her. "I came," Lucy May confirmed. She studied his face, looking for any trace of herself in his features. There was something in the shape of his eyes, perhaps, or the stubborn set of his jaw. "Tell me about my mother." For the next hour, Jake Morrison painted a picture of a woman Lucy May had never known, but had always wondered about. Her mother had been young when she died, barely 18, taken by fever when Lucy May was only 2 years old. She had loved books, Jake said, and had insisted on reading to Lucy May every night, even when she was too tired to keep her eyes open. "She would have fought for you," he said, his voice thick with regret. "She would have fought tooth and nail to keep you safe. I failed her as much as I failed you." "Why?" Lucy May asked. "Why sell me instead of finding another way?" Jake's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Because I was a coward. Because the bottle mattered more to me than anything else in the world, including my own child. Because I told myself you'd be better off without me. And maybe that part was true, but the way I went about it—" He looked up at her with eyes full of anguish. "Can you ever forgive me?" Lucy May sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of years of pain and anger warring with the compassion that the Whitmores had taught her to cultivate. Finally, she reached across the table and took his trembling hand in hers. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "Not because what you did was right, but because carrying hatred would only hurt me, and because I've learned that people can change, can become better than their worst moments." Jake Morrison died 3 weeks later, but not before receiving weekly letters from the daughter he had wronged so grievously. In those letters, Lucy May told him about her life, her work, her family. She shared stories of the children she had helped and the lessons she had learned. She even sent him a pressed rose from Catherine's garden, along with a note that said, "Something beautiful can grow from the darkest soil." When news of his death reached Millbrook, Lucy May didn't grieve as a daughter typically would, but she did feel a sense of completion, of a circle finally closed. She had faced the worst of her past and chosen love over bitterness, healing over hatred. "Do you regret it?" Catherine asked her that evening as they tended the roses together in the fading light. Going to see him, forgiving him. Lucy May considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally, "because forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about refusing to let their actions poison your future. I couldn't have become who I am today if I was still carrying around the anger of who I was yesterday." The years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and new opportunities for growth. Lucy May married a gentleman named David, a fellow teacher who shared her passion for helping struggling children. Together, they opened their home to more lost souls, creating a place where healing could happen at its own pace. Their house became known throughout the county as a refuge for children who had nowhere else to go. Some stayed for weeks, some for years, some forever. Each brought their own story of hardship and resilience, and each left knowing that they were worthy of love and capable of healing. When Lucy May was 50, the state asked her to testify before a legislative committee about the need for child protection laws. Standing before those lawmakers, she spoke not with the voice of a victim, but with the authority of someone who had transformed her pain into purpose. Every child deserves the chance to bloom, she told them, but too many are trapped in cages of neglect, abuse, and indifference. We have the power to break those cages open, to plant gardens where there is only wasteland. The question is whether we have the will to do it. The laws that were passed that year were known as the Morrison Acts, named in honor of the woman who had refused to let her past define her future. They provided funding for orphanages, created oversight for traveling shows, and established protocols for removing children from dangerous situations. As Lucy May entered her later years, she often reflected on the strange path her life had taken. From a cage in a traveling show to a classroom full of eager students, from a terrified child who couldn't trust kindness to a woman who made kindness her life's work. The journey had been long and sometimes painful, but ultimately redemptive. On her 70th birthday, the town of Millbrook declared Lucy May Whitmore Day. The ceremony was held in the town square, the same place where traveling shows had once set up their tents of exploitation. Now it was filled with former students, adopted children, and countless others whose lives had been touched by her compassion. The mayor presented her with a key to the city, but the gift that moved her most was a painting created by the elementary school children. It showed a garden in full bloom, with roses of every color reaching toward a bright sun. At the bottom, in careful childish lettering, were the words, "Thank you for showing us how to grow." That evening, as the celebration wound down and the crowds dispersed, Lucy May walked once more through Catherine's garden. The roses her adoptive mother had planted decades ago were still blooming, their descendants spreading throughout the yard in a riot of color and fragrance. Samuel and Catherine were gone now, taken by age and illness in their own time, but their legacy lived on in every life Lucy May touched, in every child she helped heal, in every act of kindness she performed. The wild child they had rescued had become something neither they nor she could have imagined, a force for healing in a world that desperately needed it. Standing among the roses in the gathering dusk, Lucy May smiled at the memory of that frightened little girl who had once cowered in a cage. That child could never have imagined the life that lay ahead of her, the love that would transform her, the purpose that would drive her. But perhaps that was the most beautiful part of the story. Not that it had a happy ending, but that it had no ending at all. The love that had saved Lucy May continued to ripple outward, touching new lives, creating new hope, planting new gardens in places where only wasteland had existed before. And somewhere in the world, another caged child was waiting for their Samuel and Catherine to arrive, waiting for someone to see past the fear and anger to the precious soul beneath. Lucy May's story had become their story too, a promise that rescue was possible, that healing could happen, that love could indeed work miracles. The roses bloomed on, year after year, season after season, a living testament to the truth that the most beautiful flowers often grow from the darkest soil, nourished by tears, but reaching always toward the light. In her final years, Lucy May established the Wild Rose Foundation, a trust fund dedicated to rescuing children from exploitation and providing them with healing homes. The foundation's symbol was a single rose breaking through iron bars, and its motto, carved in stone above the entrance to their main facility, read simply, "Every cage can be opened, every child can bloom." The foundation's first rescue came just months after its establishment. A young boy named Michael, found living alone in an abandoned warehouse, feral and frightened after years of neglect. When the foundation workers brought him to the Millbrook facility, Lucy May, now 80 and moving slowly, but with eyes still bright with purpose, was there to greet him. She knelt down despite her aching joints and spoke the same words Samuel had once spoken to her. "Hello there. My name is Lucy May. I'm going to help you feel safe, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Michael looked into her weathered face and saw something he had never seen before in an adult's eyes. Genuine kindness without expectation of anything in return. Like Lucy May decades before him, he reached out a trembling hand and took the one offered to him. As Lucy May watched the boy take his first steps toward healing, she felt the circle complete itself once more. The frightened child she had once been lived on in every rescue, every moment of choosing love over fear, every hand extended toward someone lost in darkness. The traveling shows were gone now, banned by the very laws she had helped create. But new forms of cages appeared with each generation: poverty, addiction, abuse, neglect, and the Wild Rose Foundation stood ready to break them open, one child at a time. When Lucy May passed peacefully in her sleep at 84, the entire town of Millbrook mourned. Her funeral was held in the garden she had loved so much, surrounded by the roses that had witnessed her transformation from captive to liberator. The eulogy was read by Michael, now a grown man who had become a social worker himself, carrying forward the mission she had begun. "She taught us," he said to the gathered crowd, "that no one is beyond saving, no child is beyond hope, and no cage, no matter how strong, can hold back the power of love." And in that garden, where so many stories of healing had begun, the roses continued to bloom, their sweet fragrance carried on the wind to places where other caged children waited, unknowing, for their own rescue to arrive.